Good evening, I'm Gotti Schwartz, coming to you from Los Angeles, and here's some of the stories we're following now tonight.
The object was flying at an altitude of 40,000 feet and posed a reasonable threat to the safety of civilian flight.
The Pentagon shoots down a second high-flying object, this time over Alaska airspace. And another one. The FBI finds another classified document at the home of former Vice President Mike Pence as he becomes the latest high-ranking official to have his home searched. Then the toll. Rescue workers have pulled thousands of survivors from the rubble, but tens of thousands are now dead from the earthquake that leveled huge parts of Syria and Turkey, making it one of the deadliest quakes the world has seen in decades. And fentanyl conspiracy. A Texas couple is hit with federal charges for selling fentanyl-laced pills to teenagers, leading to 3 of their deaths. And addressing stereotypes, while 2 black quarterbacks prepare to face off in the Super Bowl for the first time ever, Native Americans are protesting the Kansas City Chiefs' appropriation of indigenous cultures.
So I can confirm that the Department of Defense was tracking a high-altitude object over Alaska airspace in the last 24 hours. The object was flying at an altitude of 40,000 feet and posed a reasonable threat to the safety of civilian flight. Out of an abundance of caution and at the recommendation of the Pentagon, President Biden ordered the military to down the object. And they did, and it came inside our territorial waters.
Now, they're not calling it a balloon, but a few hours ago, National Security Council official John Kirby revealed the U.S. has shot down another high-flying object, and this time in Alaska. But the details are still extremely scarce, and we don't know who owns the object or what it was for. NBC's senior White House correspondent Kelly O'Donnell joins me now. Kelly, what do we know about this second flying object, and more importantly, what do we not know?
There are so many questions tonight, Gotti, and this is really mysterious, which adds to a lot of the intrigue here. So what we know is that President Biden was briefed on this Thursday night, and he ordered the military to shoot it down today, Friday. And what we know is that this is some kind of an unidentified object that authorities say is about the size of a small car. What they don't know is who it belongs to. So is it privately owned? Is it owned by another country? What was its purpose? What are its capabilities? Those are big and critical questions. They also, at this point, believe that it did not have the kind of maneuverability that we saw with the Chinese spy balloon that was shot down last week. It did not have the kind of surveillance payload that we know the Chinese spy balloon had. So it is smaller, and it seems to have fewer capabilities. Those are some of the things that are understood right now. Now, the location, this was all playing out over the waters of Alaska, so the Prudhoe Bay area. And when it went down, when 2 fighter jets were able to fire a missile and take it out of the sky, they believe it landed on frozen water in the American territory, probably some distance from the Canadian border, but in that region. That's giving them some hope that they can recover pieces of this object, and that may provide some needed answers to these big, mysterious what-ifs and what was this about kind of questions. Of course, it comes at a time when now we're all looking up, wondering what else might be flying overhead. But this was something that happened rather quickly in how it developed. The military was engaged, the president was involved, and now there's a lot more to learn. Gotti?
And Kelly, speaking of the Chinese spy balloon, I know that's what they're talking about on Capitol Hill almost daily now. Here's some of the Senate hearing from yesterday. Take a listen.
Quite frankly, I'll just tell you, I don't want a damn balloon going across the United States.
At what point do we say a surveillance balloon, a spy balloon coming from China is a threat to our sovereignty?
The 7-day Chinese spy balloon incident was one of the most visible, persistent, and egregious violations of U.S. sovereignty and airspace since the 9/11 terrorist attacks.
Now, it's been several days now that we've seen those images of the balloon being extracted from the water. Everybody's been zooming in, trying to learn as much as they can. What have we learned about the balloon? What happens next?
Well, the Pentagon had some developments on this today. They said that they have been able to identify some significant debris from the Chinese spy balloon on the floor of the ocean off the coast of South Carolina. Now, in this case, they believe that that, of course, had spy capabilities. In the new object that we were talking about, the threat and the reason that the president ordered it to be taken down was that its altitude, 40,000 feet, is within the range of commercial air traffic. So the purpose, they tell us, for taking it down was a risk to civilian air traffic. We don't know if it had any spy capability or anything like that. That's one of the key questions. With the Chinese balloon, they definitely have intelligence now and observation and evidence that suggests this was a part of a larger program that the Chinese have been engaged in with balloons around the world. So evidence is being found and answers are being put together as they learn more. Gotti?
Such a wild mystery. NBC's Kelly O'Donnell, thanks so much. Meanwhile, search teams in Turkey and Syria are still pulling people out of the rubble nearly 120 hours after their series of catastrophic earthquakes. The president of Turkey calling it the disaster of the century. And right now, the death toll is over 23,000. And unfortunately, that number is still rising. But in the tragedy, we're hearing some unbelievable stories of survival. This little boy right there, this little boy's name is Yeet, and he is 8 years old. He was stuck in the rubble for 52 hours, somehow emerging with that huge smile for his rescuers. You can see here his emotional reunion with his mom. But the World Health Organization is warning that, quote, a secondary disaster may be on the way if survivors don't get to the food and shelter they so desperately need. NBC's Gabe Gutierrez has more.
Gotti, there have been some incredible stories of survival today here in southeastern Turkey. For example, a 17-year-old that was pulled from the rubble in this site. He survived under a table inside the basement here. His family never left the site waiting for word about whether he would be pulled out alive. Thankfully, he was rushed to the hospital and is expected to survive. And he is just one of many survival stories that we have seen throughout the day. More than 100 hours after that initial 7.8 magnitude earthquake that rocked the region. But amid all of that celebration, there's been a lot of heartache as well. The death toll shot up again today. Now more than 23,000 people killed across Turkey and Syria as a result of that earthquake and the aftershocks. We have spent the day talking to people near the epicenter in a town called Murdoch, which is virtually gone, much of it leveled by that strong earthquake, and residents are still waiting for word about their loved ones. Search and rescue operations are still underway there, and there's a massive international rescue effort underway. We saw rescue teams from China, Russia, Spain, the Israelis in that area trying to save lives. 2 U.S. search and rescue teams are also on the ground here in southeastern Turkey, and there's still hope that more survivors could be found, but that window is closing very quickly around the 5-day mark now. And we are hearing some sad news out of Syria. The civil defense there says that search and rescue operations have ended and that it is now a recovery mission. In Syria, a very dire situation. The UN says more than 5 million people are now homeless. But again, here in Turkey, there is still some hope that some more survivors might be found, like that 17-year-old who was found earlier today right behind me in this site. Again, though, that death toll is very grim, more than 23,000, as tens of thousands of displaced residents will now spend this night, another cold night, waiting for food, water, and some sort of answer as to when this tragedy might be over. Gotti.
Gabe, thank you. And joining me now is Kate Phillip Barrasso. She is the Vice President of Global Policy and Advocacy at Mercy Corps. First question I think a lot of us have after seeing those images is how do you help?
Well, thanks for having me on, and thanks for asking that question specifically. I mean, I think the international community needs to step up its response by an order of magnitude, recognizing that this disaster is happening somewhere where there was already a significant humanitarian crisis going on, like in Northwest Syria, where Mercy Corps works. There are 4 million people who were already in need of assistance before the humanitarian crisis, who now are facing this epic natural disaster. So for members of the general public, obviously sending cash is the fastest way to help, because it allows organizations like Mercy Corps to respond nimbly and effectively on the ground in getting assistance to where it's needed most. But for policymakers, obviously providing assistance internationally, but also making sure supply lines and border crossings remain open to be able to get in humanitarian and commercial supplies to places like Northwest Syria is of paramount importance right now.
And I know the Mercy Corps is in Syria right now helping with humanitarian efforts. What do people need the most right now? I know you said cash, but what are they missing? What are some of the things that cash is going to go to? And are there ways that people can possibly volunteer?
Right. Well, I think, from our initial assessments, and I should state at the beginning, it's been an incredibly difficult week in Northwest Syria. A lot of the people responding to this disaster are affected themselves. Fortunately, all of our staff are accounted for, but many of them lost family members in the earthquake, and it's just heartbreaking. But it's amazing their resilience. A lot of them have come back to work and have been able to try to start assessments on what's needed. And 2 things really stand out, which are shelter and clean water. Shelter, obviously, because as was mentioned in the report, it's the dead of winter right now. It's a bitterly cold winter, and there are a number of people, thousands of people, who don't have shelter. And if at best they're sheltering in places that don't have heat. So it's snowing, it's raining, it's cold. They're incredibly difficult conditions to be outside. So that is one of the first lines of defense in protecting people. Second is clean water. This was a concern, frankly, in Northwest Syria before the earthquake. We were actually helping a number of displaced persons camps drill boreholes, and a lot of those have been compromised. And obviously, clean water is not existent now as a result of that. So we are trying to make sure that clean water gets to all of the displaced people, anyone who needs it, particularly given that there was a cholera outbreak before the earthquake in Northwest Syria, and we wouldn't want to see a similar situation repeat.
And Kate, we've heard as many as 5 million Syrians are now homeless because of these earthquakes in the dead of winter. What impact does this have on what was already a critical humanitarian crisis in Syria?
I mean, it's really impossible for me to overstate how much this will amplify those needs. Under any circumstances, a disaster of this magnitude would be a humanitarian catastrophe. But as I mentioned earlier, there were 4 million people in Northwest Syria who have been displaced in some cases multiple times over the course of this war, many of them already living in displaced person camps. And I would also note, the cholera outbreak that I mentioned before comes on top of what was also a bruising year due to the impacts of the Ukraine war on supplies and cost. And it's just been a very, very difficult time with humanitarian needs at incredibly high levels before this event. And this will likely, deepen those for years to come. And I would note it's so critical to state what those needs were before and what they will be now, because Syria really has been sliding off of the international radar screen, not because those humanitarian needs were gone, but just because they've been eclipsed by other global events.
Okay, we can't thank you enough for joining us tonight and everything that you guys are doing out there. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
2 people in Texas are facing federal charges tonight. They're accused of selling fentanyl-laced pills that ended up in the hands of middle schoolers. 3 students died after taking the pills in the last 5 months. 6 others were hospitalized, and officials say all of the victims were between 13 and 17 years old. Federal investigators say Luis Navarrete and Magali Mejia Cano allegedly sold fake Percocet and Oxycontin pills to drug dealers who were in their teens, and those pills were traced to a high school and 2 middle schools. Morgan Chesky joins me now from Dallas, Texas. Morgan, how's the community there responding to this case?
Gotti, they're absolutely stunned and disheartened because this is a national epidemic, of course, that we've been reporting on for some time. And for it to happen in their own backyard, it hits especially hard. And part of that is because of this affidavit that was released by federal investigators. They found out that over the last 6 months, 6 students were hospitalized, 3 were killed as a result of taking these fentanyl-laced pills that were sold, as you mentioned, allegedly by those 2 individuals, one of whom faced a federal judge today. And so right now they're just trying to grapple with the loss and also try to figure out a way to move forward here. Gotti?
And Morgan, did the affidavit paint a picture as to how those fentanyl-laced pills might have gotten into the hands of the teens?
Yeah, it's important to note that fentanyl was not the drug being purchased here. These were fentanyl-laced pills that look like other drugs that are available right now. And so, according to investigators, they say that it passes off as another drug or 2 that's being used right now, and then students would purchase those drugs, some of which, upon being consumed, would have no effect, but others, those laced with those lethal doses of fentanyl, can prove absolutely devastating. In some cases, we heard from one mother who lost her own child, not a student at this school, but just to fentanyl. She said that, according to doctors, she was killed within about 60 seconds after ingesting that one pill. So that is how deadly these pills are, this drug is, and that's why we're seeing a real increase, a real push for education, both not only in this one district, but nationwide. Gotti?
Speaking of that nationwide outreach, we heard the president talk about the fentanyl crisis in his State of the Union address earlier this week. Let's take a quick listen.
Fentanyl is killing more than 70,000 Americans a year. So let's launch a major surge to stop fentanyl production and the sale and trafficking with more drug detection machines, inspection cargo, stop pills and powder at the border.
Now, Morgan, when it comes to the people that you've been talking to in North Texas, what do they see as the solution?
It will take a multi-pronged effort. I spoke to 2 mothers today who lost children to fentanyl-laced pills. I say children. One of the daughters was 20. Another woman's son was 30 years old. They both expressed this feeling that they still don't think people understand how deadly this drug is, and that they say that really with this naloxone, this Narcan, that can be a life-saving element if someone is facing a lethal dose of fentanyl. That still has to be administered minutes after someone comes into contact with the drug to save a life. Outside of that, it's still incredibly devastating. One mother in particular told me that her daughter was suffering from pain from endometriosis. Her prescription ran out. She turned to a family member in hopes of gaining some more of those painkillers, and they passed along an Oxycontin that happened to be laced with a lethal dose of fentanyl. The mother said, "I never thought this could happen to my child," and her warning to parents, if you think it can never happen to you, it absolutely can, and that's why she's raising the alarm. Gotti?
Morgan Chesky, thanks so much. And today, the family of Tyre Nichols gathered at a Memphis park for a dedication in his honor. The ceremony comes as the district attorney there is now reviewing all cases involving the 5 ex-officers charged with his murder. NBC's Priscilla Thompson has more.
And they had guns out. They were like, "Get the F out the car before we shoot."
Just 3 days before Tyre Nichols was brutally beaten to death by Memphis police officers, Montarius Harris said he had a violent encounter with the same officers now charged with Nichols' murder. An affidavit of complaint filed by police confirms all 5 ex-officers were involved in Harris's arrest, though their account of what happened differs.
Tell me about the night of January the 4th.
My car was approached by a bunch of men wearing black. They had on ski masks.
What went through your mind in that moment?
I was terrified. I didn't know who they were. I didn't know if I was being robbed or carjacked.
The police affidavit alleges that Harris drove at detectives at a high rate of speed and that an officer smelled marijuana when he approached the car. Police say Harris then put the car in reverse before getting out and taking off on foot. Harris admits he tried to drive away, but says that's because he didn't realize the men surrounding the car were police until he got out.
And they began to hit me and punch on me, and one of the guys threw me to the ground, hit my head on the concrete.
He says he spent several days in jail and took these photos of his wounds after he was released. Harris is now charged with possession of marijuana with intent to sell, possession of Xanax, and being a convicted felon in possession of a handgun, a gun he says belonged to his cousin. But now, cases like his are under investigation by the Shelby County District Attorney's Office. The office announcing it will review all past and pending cases of the 5 former officers charged in Nichols' death, and that more cases involving Memphis's now deactivated Scorpion unit could be called into question. Harris's attorney believes the number of cases could be in the thousands.
How often do you believe the Scorpion unit was having these types of violent encounters?
Daily, multiple times a day.
Harris is now suing the city and the officers involved in his arrest for $5 million, alleging his arrest was legally unjustified, unquestionably unconstitutional, and unacceptable in any civilized society. The city of Memphis did not respond to NBC's request for comment on Harris's lawsuit. The 5 former officers named in the suit either could not be reached or chose not to comment. This comes as more details about the Tyre Nichols case emerge. Ex-officer Preston Hemphill was among the police that pulled Nichols over that night.
Hey, you guys are really doing a lot.
According to official documents obtained by NBC News, Hemphill now acknowledges he did not witness Nichols driving recklessly. The 5 ex-officers charged with murder are scheduled to appear in court for the first time next week. Attorneys for 2 of the men have said their clients will plead not guilty. Priscilla Thompson, NBC News, Memphis.
And still to come, another day, another classified document, this time found at former Vice President Mike Pence's home. Plus, the Murdoch murder trial is turning its focus to finances. Why the prosecution thinks the money trail reveals his motive. Now tonight is just getting started. The FBI has taken another classified document from former Vice President Mike Pence's Indiana home today. The search lasted several hours and was agreed to by both Pence's people and the Justice Department after some other classified material was found there last month. The search comes less than 24 hours after it was reported that Pence had been subpoenaed in an investigation into former President Donald Trump. Monica Alba has more on the story. Monica?
Hey there, Gotti. Well, we knew this search was likely to take place this week, and now we're learning it took 5 hours. And federal agents recovered an additional classified document at former Vice President Pence's home in Indiana earlier today. They also took 6 additional pages that didn't have classified markings for review, and those may end up being government records, but they're going to check. And now, if we rewind here, let's remember that the former VP did a search of his own private residence in recent weeks and turned up some classified material and then handed it over to the National Archives. And the reason he did that was because the current president had identified classified material at his own personal home in Wilmington, Delaware. So Mr. Pence, like President Biden, has pledged full cooperation with the Department of Justice. And this is different than how former President Trump handled sensitive material, taking classified records with him to Mar-a-Lago when he left office, refusing to hand them over, and then the FBI ultimately got involved, recovering hundreds of those records last August. So unlike that case where a search warrant was needed, this was what's known as a consent search, where the Pence attorneys and the DOJ coordinated on this, and they agreed to some ground rules before everything took place today. So now we'll see if we learn more about what was recovered from the Indiana home. We may not. And as a reminder, Mr. Pence did apologize for this and said that he suspects aides may have packed these items mistakenly when he left the vice presidency and then sent them to his house. But it comes as there's other significant news related to the former VP, who we now can report has been subpoenaed in a separate federal probe, the special counsel's investigation into former President Trump's effort to overturn the legitimate results of the 2020 election and his role in the January 6th Capitol riot. So plenty of developments that we're following on this front. Gotti.
Monica Alba, thanks so much. And today, testimony continued in the Alex Murdoch trial. The former South Carolina lawyer is accused of murdering both his wife and his son in 2021. For days, prosecutors have been laying out Murdoch's alleged financial crimes, which they say was motive for the murders. NBC News correspondent Ellison Barber has the latest. Ellison?
In court today, jurors heard from the attorney representing the family of Mallory Beach. That is the woman who was killed in a 2019 boat crash, a boat that was allegedly being driven by the now deceased Paul Murdoch while he was under the influence. That attorney, Mark Tinsley, told the court the civil case against Alec Murdoch would have been over when Paul and Maggie died, that he would have considered dropping Alec Murdoch from the lawsuit because a jury would likely be too sympathetic to convict. The prosecution suggested the defendant, an experienced lawyer himself, would have known that. At the same time, we heard from a former housekeeper who was very close with Maggie Murdoch. She told the court after Tinsley's testimony that she had conversations with the late Maggie Murdoch related to Alec's concerns about that case. Listen.
She was worried because a lawsuit had been presented stating that they wanted $30 million. Maggie was crying. Maggie said, we don't have that kind of money, Blanc, and that's what she used to call me. She said, we don't have that. She said, if I could give them everything that I got and make this go away, she said, I would do it in a heartbeat. She said she knew the amount of money that they were asking, but she felt that Alec was not being truthful to her with regard to what exactly was going on with that lawsuit. She said, he doesn't tell me everything.
The prosecution has spent the last few days trying to establish a motive in this case. Most of the layers of their narrative centered around concerns Alec Murdoch had about financial issues, either related to that civil case or allegations of theft and deceit within his law firm. He has been accused separately of stealing over $9 million from his law firm and legal clients. The prosecution is trying to convince the jury that Alec Murdoch murdered his wife and son because it was the only way he thought he could shift attention, buy himself some time to deal with all of the financial issues that were, in his view, they say, coming to the surface. Back to you.
NBC's Ellison Barber, thanks so much. And after the break, we are going to have much more, including on the fight to save water for nearly 40 million people. We're going to explore how the crisis with the Colorado River is now inching towards catastrophe. But first, honoring Black history. Tonight, we're looking at the story of Ethel Payne. She's known as the First Lady of the Black Press, writing mostly for the Chicago Defender. She was the first Black woman to be included in the White House press corps. Ethel covered some of the most significant moments in history, especially during the Civil Rights era. We're going to be right back. It's time now for some of the big headlines we're watching tonight. It was a busy day at the White House. President Biden hosted a group of governors and Brazil's president in separate meetings today. The president met with 37 governors from both sides of the aisle. As for Brazil's President Lula, the two talked about democracy and political violence. Alec Baldwin is facing a new lawsuit over the fatal Rust shooting. The family of Helena Hutchins, who Baldwin shot and killed on set, is now suing the actor and others involved in the film. The lawsuit alleges battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and negligence. Hutchinson's sister spoke out in a video message with her mother.
To lose my sister, at least personally for me, was a horrible experience. And even more devastating is to see the utter suffering of our parents. I believe to let this go and to leave this unpunished is unallowable.
And the suspect in the Half Moon Bay mass shooting was in court today. He was there for several defense motions, including one for a gag order and one to keep cameras out of the courtroom. The suspect faces several counts of first-degree murder for the January shooting that left 7 dead. A plea hearing is scheduled for next week. And Florida lawmakers passed a bill today that expands the governor's program to fly migrants to blue states. The program, enacted last year, allows migrants to be flown to Democratic-led cities and states that have sanctuary policies. And the new bill allows the DeSantis administration to relocate migrants from any state. Critics are comparing the policy to human trafficking, and that bill now heads to Governor DeSantis for his signature. And in Colorado, people can now buy weed from a vending machine in the city of Aurora. Now, you still need to check in and show proof that you're old enough, but that's the vending machine right there. And desert cities in the West are pitching in to help save water for 40 million people. And that's because the record mega drought has choked the West. Reservoirs and lake levels out here are now the lowest they've ever been, while populations continue to rise. But one desert city isn't waiting for a deal. Reporter Brad Hicks went to see how Las Vegas is fighting for its future.
In a city famous for excess, nothing says over the top like giant fountains. While just over the hill, the source of the city's water, Lake Mead, dips dangerously low. But like a magic show on the Vegas Strip, the fountains are not as they appear. You'll see why in a moment. Over the past 20 years, Lake Mead has dropped 170 feet, halfway to a disastrous dead pool level when no water at all would be able to flow through Hoover Dam.
You could see the lake getting to dead pool within the next 24 months.
So the need to save in southern Nevada has never been more urgent. 99% of the water that goes down an indoor drain gets captured, cleaned, and released back into Lake Mead to be reused.
Motivation is one of survival.
But indoor use accounts for only 40%. The rest just soaks into the ground or evaporates. The big culprit is grass. It takes 78 gallons a year to keep just 1 square foot of grass green in the desert. So the state has ordered all non-functional grass be removed from southern Nevada by 2026.
Taken out enough grass in Las Vegas to take an 18-inch wide piece of sod and lay it around the circumference of the earth.
But no matter how much water they save, it won't solve the problem. 80% of Colorado River water is used for irrigation, most in Arizona and California. If Lake Mead reaches dead pool, those two states will be completely cut off. Southern Nevada, on the other hand, has a safety net, a new intake so deep in the lake, even at dead pool, it could keep the flow going to the Strip and beyond. Which brings us back to those fountains at Bellagio.
Lake Bellagio does not draw on municipal water or Lake Mead whatsoever.
The fountains are fed from a private well. So no matter how dire the outlook is for Lake Mead, tourists can still have the illusion of an oasis in the desert. Brad Hicks reporting.
And a powerful storm system is pummeling the southeast tonight. As much as 2 inches of rain have fallen in parts of the Florida Panhandle and southern Georgia, and it could get stronger tomorrow, possibly even bringing some snow to parts of North Carolina and Virginia. Let's bring in NBC News meteorologist Bill Cairns for the forecast. Bill, what's in store for the southeast?
An ugly weekend, Gotti. I mean, we're going to see a little bit of severe weather. Some areas, as you mentioned, may actually wake up and get some snow, but it's just a lot of rain. It's going to be just not a, one of those weekends if you have a to-do list for everything inside. It's one of those weekends. So everything on the map here, the green shows you where the rain is, the yellow is the heavy rain, and where you see the yellow and the oranges and the reds, that's where we actually have some thunderstorms. So we're going to see some periods of this over the next 2 days throughout this region. The area of greatest concern for any flash flooding, we don't have any flash flood warnings right now, but anywhere from Tallahassee northward Valdosta to Tifton, Georgia, this area has gotten soaked over the last couple of weeks with numerous storms. So when the heavy rain rolls through here tomorrow again, we may get some isolated flooding. So anyone traveling I-10 there, that would be the problem area. So here's the timeline. Here we take you through Saturday afternoon into early evening. Just a torrential rain over areas of all of South Carolina. So I know people have been reporting a lot of pollen in the air because spring has arrived early with our warm winter on the East Coast. This will wash it all away. So that's a little bit of a blessing. But the heavy rain will not be. By the evening hours, it'll make it up to Raleigh. It'll still be raining hard on the backside of this. And we do worry about along this cold front, as it heads through northern Florida, some isolated severe storms, maybe an isolated tornado. Then on Sunday, Super Bowl Sunday, kind of an ugly, rainy day. Washington, D.C. to Roanoke, Charlotte, northwards to Raleigh, and all of Virginia, some of the Delmarva region, too. Just a soaking cold rain. So we'll start with the severe threats. This is going to be Saturday afternoon and evening. As that cold front goes through, we'll see the storms sweeping from west to east. Maybe an isolated tornado, but definitely some gusty winds, not hail. More concerned, though, with power outages being some of those strong storms with the wind. And the rainfall totals, you notice everyone gets like 1, almost 2 inches of rain. locally up to 4 inches. So this is a soaker. So this is great for your early season lawn and getting the garden ready and everything like that, but not for any of your weekend plans. And we did mention the chance of some of that snow. We haven't had a lot of snow in the central Appalachians, and this is going to be an elevation event. You really have to be getting up there towards where the ski resorts are or hiking to the top of some of these mountains, but we will see at least 3 to 4 inches. You'll see pictures, I'm sure, online of some of these ski resorts with snow because they just haven't had any. So your weekend forecast looks like this. That's the southeast story. The rest of the country, I mean, this is like a double thumbs up weekend. Lots of sunshine, 41 in Chicago, no complaints, 46 in New York, Dallas 55, no problems. By the time we get to Super Bowl Sunday, that's that mess in the mid-Atlantic, but the rest of the country, storm-free. I mean, ideal weather with plenty of sunshine, 50s all the way up into South Dakota, 60s in Texas, still in the 40s, even Boston at 50. I mean, that's like a March weekend, not a February weekend. So, of course, we had the big event ending the weekend, Gotti. The Super Bowl forecast, it's going to be great for everyone outside, and it's going to be great in general. Of course, it usually is this time of year in Arizona. 70 degrees, sunny and warm. Hopefully the game will be as good as the weather.
70 degrees at kickoff. We'll see. Yeah. Thanks so much, Bill Carrington. The Florida Senate has approved a bill that will allow Governor Ron DeSantis to take over Walt Disney's World Self-Governing District. Now, under this bill, the district would be renamed but would stay intact, and DeSantis would be able to appoint a 5-member governing board. That's important since right now Disney essentially handpicks its board members. The bill will also end Disney's exemption from regulatory reviews, but Disney would be liable for nearly $1 billion to pay for roads, sewers, and other infrastructure. DeSantis and Disney have been at odds after the company publicly opposed the Don't Say Gay bill. Now DeSantis is expected to sign the bill into law. And coming up, spotlight on heritage. Sunday's big game in Arizona is shining a light on the traditions and the controversies surrounding Native American communities. But first, you got to see this. Experts say an extremely rare eagle has made its way from Russia to Maine to Newfoundland, then back to the United States. Insane, right? Well, now bird lovers are flocking to Georgetown, Maine to get a glimpse of this Steller's sea eagle.
Were you able to see it? Yes!
Our reclusive visitor ventured out on the shore, just visible by our camera. Still pretty good for once, now twice in a lifetime.
Even if we got here and didn't see him, it's still gone.
The celebrations leading up to the Super Bowl are more than just concerts and parties. It's a chance for the host state to show off their customs, and in Arizona, that includes a lot of Native American tribes. But earlier this week in Scottsdale, while a group of Native Americans was performing for a Super Bowl-related content, an art gallery owner was caught on video appearing to mock the dancers in a racist way. And before playing the incident, a warning that some of you might find it upsetting.
Step into the street, my friend.
Come over here. Let's go back to
Step into the street, my friend.
Go back to Keller.
Step into the street, my friend. Or are you scared? Are you scared? Are you afraid?
Hey, you guys. Step in the street right here. Step in the street. Well, hey, don't tell me.
You didn't see me.
He told me step in the street.
You didn't see me.
Oh, your little buddies came over here.
Did you see me
Oh,
run?
your little friends came over here. You sure backed up, you Indian.
Now, Gilbert Ortega, the man in that video and the owner of the art gallery, is now facing 3 charges of disorderly conduct, police say. The man who took the video, Cody Blackbird, says Ortega tried apologizing with flowers and a chanupa, which is a kind of pipe used by the Lakota people in the Dakotas. He said the pipe added, quote, insult to injury. NBC News has reached out to Ortega, but so far we've not heard back. Now, Arlisa Bensetti is an Indigenous Affairs reporter for the Arizona Republic. She's been covering the fallout from this video and joins us now. Arlisa, what more can you tell us about the incident itself? Why were these dancers performing?
Okay, so like you said, Cody Blackbird, who is a 6-time Native American Music Award-winning musician, he's a flutist. He, along with other Native American performers, were performing for ESPN for a Super Bowl special. And now they were at the Native Art Market in Scottsdale, which is probably, I think, across the street from Gilbert Ortega's store. And after that whole performance that was going on, especially there's this big sign for the Super Bowl, they went over there to that sign to do another performance, and that kind of antagonized Gilbert Ortega Jr., from what I've been told. So he came out, and that's what you see in the video there. But there's one thing also that I saw later on in a different video. And that was Ortega Jr. looking as if he's dancing with a phone and swaying back and forth. But when I heard what he was saying at that moment, I and other actual fluent Navajo speakers realized he was making suggestive movements, because what he was saying in Navajo was pretty disgusting and derogatory. And just because it wasn't being said in English, but rather in poorly speaking Navajo, it still should be considered very offensive.
And how serious are the criminal charges right now against Gilbert Ortega Jr.? What's next for him?
Right now, it's under investigation from what I've been told from the Scottsdale Police Department. And the charges that you mentioned are the only information that I was able to receive thus far.
I know that there are 22 federally recognized Native American tribes within Arizona's borders, the Hopi tribe, Pueblo of Zuni, to name a few. What can you tell us about the relationship between the people who live in these tribal areas and those who don't? It sounded like he said something along the lines of, like, don't go back to Gallup, which is just across the border in New Mexico, but also another place with a very large indigenous population.
Yes, Gallup, New Mexico is a border town, which is right near Navajo Nation. And Gilbert Ortega's father started his business in Gallup, New Mexico, where there's still an establishment there. I don't know how affiliated that establishment still is with Gilbert Ortega, but the name and the business is still there. So I did see an apology from Gilbert Ortega Jr., where he did say, I grew up with the Navajo and Zuni cultures in Gallup, New Mexico. So I have always had the deepest respect and admiration for Native American. And, you know, I did not receive that apology or that statement. I saw it in a different publication. But a lot of tradings and trading posts are within Gallup, New Mexico. And that's where not only Navajo, but other, you know, like the Zuni tribe, the Hopi tribe, they have been doing business within these border towns that surround our reservations. So when he says Gallup, it has a different kind of connotation because of the history of racism, exploitation within these border towns, especially with Gallup.
Arlisa, it's so important to know the context behind those videos, and thanks so much for filling that in for us. Arlisa Becenti with the Arizona Republic, thanks again.
Thank you very much.
And we are less than 48 hours away from witnessing history at Super Bowl 57. For the first time ever, two black quarterbacks will compete against each other. NBC correspondent Nyala Charles has the story.
Patrick Mahomes and Jalen Hurts are making Super Bowl history. Two black quarterbacks will lead their teams in the Super Bowl for the first time.
Yeah, I think it's history. I think it's something that's worthy of being noted, and it is history. You know, it's come a long way.
Since the NFL's first championship in 1920, there haven't been many black starting quarterbacks, and even fewer have made it to the Super Bowl stage. The first one to ever win the big game, Doug Williams in 1988.
It's a historical moment for the NFL, for football fans across the world.
Do you think it took too long to get here?
It took way too long. And I say that because the NFL is over 100 years old.
Although the majority of NFL players are black now, the leadership positions have historically been reserved for white men. In 1920, Fitz Pollard, a black QB, started in the league's inaugural championship. But by 1933, after the last two black players left the league, it banned black players.
There was just this understanding that, you know, hey, we're going to be like baseball. We're not going to have any blacks in the league.
The ban was lifted 13 years later. But even then, what historians call racial stacking came into play.
Positional prejudice. You know, there were no black quarterbacks. There were no black centers. There were no black middle linebackers.
You know, the stigma has always been it's a leadership position. The myth that a black guy can't think.
The problem continued into the 2000s. From 2001 to 2010, only 6 of the 27 quarterbacks selected in the first round of the draft were black. Even that was too many for some.
I think what we've had here is a little social concern in the NFL. I think the media has been very desirous that a black quarterback do well.
This year, the most black starting quarterbacks in history, 11.
For me, this is total jubilation.
But on the sidelines, only 3 black head coaches.
Why do you think that is?
Well, that's a question that's easy to answer. You know, the owner's got to make a decision.
There has never been a black NFL team owner. But now, fans and athletes, both former and present, are taking in this historic moment of progress as the entire nation gets ready for some football.
Who are you rooting for?
I can't lose.
NBC Shaq Brewster is in Glendale, Arizona, which is hosting this year's game. Shaq, this is also the first time the Super Bowl is going to be played in a state where gambling is legal. I know you talked to a CEO of a casino that's got a sports book at the stadium. What did he tell you about this moment for the industry?
He says that he believes that sports betting is here to stay. The explosive growth that this industry has seen, you see it every year in the new numbers from the American Gaming Association. This year, for example, for this Super Bowl, we learned that more than 50 million people plan to bet on this game. That's about $16 billion of cash that's being bet connected to this game. So you mentioned there's a sports book actually on the campus, on the stadium campus where the Super Bowl is being hosted. The owner showed me around the sports book a little bit, showed me how many bets you can make. He said about 800 bets, different bets, everything from who wins the coin flip to who wins the actual game. And he showed me the process and explained what this moment is for folks in his industry. Listen to what he told me.
One of the advantages of the industry now being legal and regulated, what we're seeing is progressive innovation. A lot of capital going into improving the product, expanding wagering options, and that's good for fans.
Now, Gotti, after the interview, I admit I did ask him if there's any team or any specific bet I should place, knowing that he might know a little something. He said he couldn't tell me anything like that, but he did say that the Eagles are slightly favored to win this Super Bowl, but it's an extremely tight margin, Gotti.
What about the fans? What are they saying about placing bets?
Well, they say it's something that they just can't avoid. If you watch other Super Bowls in the past, if you watch football or basketball, you'll see when you turn on the TV, you see all the commercials for the different apps that you can use to place that bet. You know about the NFL partnerships, official partnerships with DraftKings, for example. And even if you watch some of the games, sometimes you'll hear the commentators talk about the spread for the game or who's favored to win as they're in the pregame ceremonies and pregame shows. So they can't avoid it, and that's the sense that I got from a lot of the fans. Listen to what they told me directly.
It's advertised everywhere, so it's like, I gotta get into action.
Obviously, you gotta be of age. He was trying to convince his father to do it, but he knows better because he doesn't want to get sucked into it.
Now, there is also some caution here, and that's something that both the CEO warned, and that's something you hear from the American Gaming Association, that there can be problems. You don't want to use betting as a way to pay your rent, in the words of the CEO. This should be fun, and the message, the tagline that you hear from the NFL is that once it stops becoming fun, then there's a problem, Gotti.
And I got to ask, I mean, there's a split family that you just talked to, but what fan base is showing out in the desert so far? I mean, have you seen more Chiefs, more Eagles? Well, what does it look like?
You know, I really enjoyed talking to those split families. I think I was just stirring the pot a little bit and then just leaving leaving them to kind of, leaving them to fix some of their wounds and whatever issues that come about. I will say, when I was downtown, you know, they have a huge fan experience for those who can't afford to buy a ticket here to the game, the lucky fans who can go inside the stadium. As I was down there, I did see much more red than I did green. Many more Chiefs fans than Eagles fans, but in the words of the Eagles fans, it's a longer trip. We know it's almost double the distance, so they say they are coming in the next couple of days, Scotty.
And Shaq, finally, I don't know if you know, but NBC News Now, we've got a sports book right here. Shaq, Gotti, heads or tails, man? Let's start there. What do you think?
Tails never fails, Gotti.
Tails never fails. All right, if it's heads, I get one of those beanies that you're always wearing in the cold. Deal?
All right, got you. Deal.
All right,
deal.
There we go. Shaq Brewster, thanks so much.
All right.
That does it for us. Have a great weekend, and until Monday, I'm Gotti Schwartz for Now Tonight. The news continues right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.